Hello, everybody. I'm Angela Didabo. You may recognize me from the lobby. I just helped everyone get seated. I'm the artistic producing director here.
Oh, no, keep the music on. I was going to sing to it. Hi, I'm Carrie Idell, and I am the Director of Finance and Grants here, formerly the Executive Director, but if you haven't been here in a while, Angela Didabo and Janie Anderson over there, Managing Director, now run the theater. And on behalf of everybody, I just want to say welcome. This is very exciting for us to host this event. And I just want to give you a few housekeeping pieces of information. Second exit is obviously to my right over here. If you've not been here before, the restrooms are out the door you came in and then down the hall to the left. There will be a book signing afterwards. This performance is being recorded, or this reading is being recorded. So if I could ask you to turn off your cell phones and any other electronic equipment, except pacemakers, you could leave those on. That'll be okay. And what else can I say? Is that enough of the housekeeping?
I think that's enough from the finance and grants guy. What do you all think? You guys got the finance and grants part down? I also just want to remind everybody there will also be a Q&A following the reading. And just, you said a book signing. That follows the Q&A. We didn't rehearse.
That's why I'm retiring.
This is live theater, baby. I just want to give a special shout out to Nash's. I was there picking up something about a month ago, and Erik's book was sitting on one of the tables. And does anybody here have a copy of the book yet? Yep. So it's printed in a slightly larger format. It's the first time I've read a book without reading glasses since I can't remember when. So that might have had something to do with it. And I took it home and I thought, well, I'll just leaf through it. And, you know, when I get a minute, I'll dive in. But I couldn't put it down. I read it cover to cover till about 2 o'clock in the morning. I usually go to bed about 9:30, so 2 o'clock in the morning's literally the middle of the night for me. And then I wrote to my good friend Frederik R-L Osborne, and I said, what are the chances that your dad would be willing to come to Auburn Public Theater to do a reading the week before Christmas? And Lithgow said, well, why don't you send him an email and ask? And gratefully, he said yes. Yeah, thank you. We're going to briefly bring out Auburn Public Theater Board member Joanne O'Connor, introducer of our Tuesday and Saturday movies. She also has a very informal PhD on the Osborne family, so we're going to let her do the actual introduction. Thank you all so much for coming. Enjoy. Erik Osborne.
Thank you, Angela. And a good afternoon to you, my fellow Auburnians and friends who have traveled here today to hear Frederik Osborne read from his latest and very much so page-turning book, Erik's Story, Life in a Changing World. Also joining Mr. Osborne reading selected passages will be his son Lithgow and daughter Betsy. Aren't we the lucky ones this afternoon? I'm quite certain, I got this right? I'm quite certain that everyone seated here, let me turn this a little bit towards me, that everyone seated here at Auburn Public Theater has a treasured memory of a moment spent with Mr. Osborne. I was 9 or so when one late afternoon I was with my dad, Ed O'Connor. I had met him after work at the National Bank, the now empty old bank down the street. We had just walked out the front door on the east side of the building and were on the sidewalk when a man, a grown-up man with very long legs and wearing a suit, was riding a bicycle right past us heading towards South Street. Who is that? I asked my dad. Looking down the street, the bicycle nearing Cosman's and almost out of sight, he said, oh, that's Mr. Osborne. Not certain if he mentioned to me that Mr. Osborne was on the board of the bank, and if he did, the only board I knew of was the one that I didn't look at school. Another time, an early afternoon, Dad and I were in the station wagon at the stoplight at the corner of North and Genesee, just past Roxy Shoes. I remember this clearly as it was just me and Dad and I was seated in the front seat. That was rare. In the window view across the street, looking at the corner of South and Genesee, were 3 people, a grown man and 2 teenage boys in suits, all of them quite tall, walking at a swift, directed pace with the backs of their sport coats flapping in the wind as they rounded the corner of the bank, the one with the clock in the tower, the Auburn Savings Bank. I'd never seen people walk that fast in Auburn. And such posture. Who are they? I asked my dad. That's Mr. Osborne, he said, and his sons. Another moment seared in my memory was a summer evening in 1971 at the Springside Inn. It was the opening night, moments before the lights dimmed for a show at Springside Dinner Theater. Along with the Osborne kids, I was one of the apprentices working backstage. From behind the curtain, I could feel the heart-pounding excitement in the audience, the bubbling conversations, the big laughs, perfume in the air, ice clinking in the glasses. I had to look. So I peeked through the curtains, the black drapes, and the first and forever remembered person I saw was Mr. Osborne. He was standing tall in the middle of the room, looking all around at the hometown spark that he and the Osborne family, and of course the Ryford family, had created. Generations of Auburn Osbornes have led the way here, guiding and funding the arts and manufacturing, at one time being the largest employer in the county, and women's rights. Great-grandmother Martha Coffin Wright, the very dangerous woman leading the charge. And prison reform, the work of Mr. Osborne's grandfather, Thomas Mott, making positive life prison changes that are reflected today with the Osborne Association. In addition to book writing, the Osborne family has played an important part in local media. They published the Citizen Advertiser and founded Auburn Cablevision. Mr. Osborne's uncle ran the WMBO radio station. Mr. Osborne said, I soon found out that after you've been in the newspaper and radio business, you'll be in the TV business too. Today, at 98 years young, Frederik Osborne shares his story in his latest memoir, Life in a Changing World. Now, today, I was very pressed for time. Of course, I got up too late, and as usual, and I'm racing to get here, racing together, and I said, I got to check my mail. And so I've got Christmas cards in the mailbox, and why am I reading Christmas cards? But there's a reason. I got a Christmas card from a friend of mine, a champion athlete, a retired champion athlete like Mr. Osborne, and I want to share with you a quote that he included from George Bernard Shaw in the card. This is the true, wait, let me get again. This is the true joy in life, to be used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one, to be a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish little clot of ailments and grievances complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and that as long as I live, it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch which I have got a hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before I hand it on to the future generations. And I think that's saying a lot about Mr. Osborne here today. So, ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome Frederik R-L Osborne.
My first memories. I was born in Auburn in 1926. My first memory is the old house built by my great-grandfather, David Munson Osborne. He was prospering in the manufacture of farm machinery and built a large house at 99 South Street. According to family legend, when the $100,000. He tore them up and stopped counting. Growing up in Auburn as Osborne gave me a skewed idea of life. My great-grandfather had started the farm machinery factory, which sold equipment all over the world. The factory employed 5,000 people in Auburn at its height. After the business was sold, the family still owned the newspaper, the largest hotel in town, and the first-run theater. As a child, I can recall going to the theater and not buying a ticket. I would simply say, Osborne, and my friends and I would walk right in. The City Hall and the Women's Union building were both given to the city by my family. A trip to Europe. In the spring of 1930, my parents took my brothers, Devins and Richard, and me, along with my nurse, Mrs. Sitzer, to Europe to visit my mother's family. We sailed on the SS Washington from New York City to Hamburg, where we were met by 2 cars and driven to Alhelm, my grandfather's castle in Denmark. The castle had a moat and a dungeon and was huge. When my parents were married there in 1918, they only invited 60 people because that's all the room they had in the castle. The castle had been built as a coastal fortress and had become a royal castle in 1375. The Raab and Levitzow family bought it from King Frederick IV in 1725. I can remember looking down at the dungeon from a trapdoor in the floor of a room. I remember how big the castle was and how many servants there were. My grandfather, Count Frederick Christian Raab and Levitzow, was the largest private landowner in Denmark. In those times, properties were entailed, meaning they were all left to the oldest male heir. My great-grandfather's ancestors had either not married or had had no sons. As a result, he had inherited 6 country estates and a house in Copenhagen. My grandfather had been a diplomat and served as Danish foreign minister. He was on good terms with Kaiser William II, who honored him with the Order of the Red Eagle. The order was represented by an 8-pointed star made of diamonds with the German insignia of the order in the center. The Kaiser and the Kaiserine also paid a visit to Alhelm in 1912. My mother was offered a post as a lady-in-waiting to the Kaiserine, which she turned down. She felt that life at the German court would be a bore. When Germany invaded Belgium in 1914, my grandfather was furious at what the Germans had done. He took his decoration to his jeweler, had the German insignia replaced by a jewel. He then gave the decoration to my mother. It now belongs to my son Christopher, whose middle name is also Raab and Levitzow. My Danish relatives. My Danish grandmother was born in Paris of American parents. Her mother, Lily Greenough, came from Cambridge, Mass., and had been sent to Paris at an early age for voice training. She had a fine voice and sang duets with Jenny Lind, the world-famous opera singer. While Lily was in Paris in 1862, she met and married Charles Moulton, an American banker who lived in Paris. The winter of 1863 was cold, and Lily received a pair of skates from her mother. My great-grandmother was very anxious to try them out. She had skated since she was 8, growing up in Cambridge. She set out on the little lake near her home, and also near the home of the Emperor Napoleon III at Versailles. The ice was beautiful. There was a crowd around the pond, but nobody else ventured on the ice. To encourage the others, she took her baby son from his nurse and skated around the pond with him in her arms. The result was that some of the would-be skaters ventured out on the ice. When she returned her baby to the nurse and was watching the skaters, Emperor Napoleon III stumbled over to her and said, "Dare I ask such a perfect skater as you to skate with so humble a skater as myself?" He took her hand and they set off, he stumbling and she holding him up. At the end of the tour, they stopped in front of the Empress Eugenia. The emperor urged his wife to skate with Lily, which she did. The tour was a success, and that was how Lily was introduced to Parisian society. She and the emperor and the empress remained friends until he died in early 1873. Among other things, they were invited to a house party at the Versailles Palace, Napoleon's principal place of residence. In the Army. During my senior year at Deerfield, I turned 18 and registered for the draft. This is in 1945. Happily, the county draft board allowed me to finish the school year. I applied at Harvard even though I was going into the Army, and I was accepted. My father told me I could go to college anywhere I wished, but that he would pay my way to Harvard. Little did he or I know that most of my college tuition would be paid by the GI Bill. I've always been glad that I applied when I did. 3 weeks after my Deerfield graduation, I was in the Army for 15 months. And then one day, I happened to read a news article saying that soldiers who had been in the Army for a year and had been accepted in college could be immediately discharged. It took me about a week to go through the Army's paperwork, but when it was done, I'd gone from an Army private to a Harvard freshman. Looking back at my time in the Army was very lonely. My background was so different from my fellow soldiers that it was difficult to connect with them. I never told anybody I went to private school, that my father was an ambassador, that my mother was a countess, or that I was going to Harvard. I thought doing so would be a mistake. I remember being told of the GI Bill by my sergeant, who said it would pay my way to college. When I said I would go to college anyway, he didn't believe me. In 1949, my roommate from college, Sam Peabody, joined me as we toured Europe. We decided to visit his sister, Marietta Tree, and her husband, Ronnie. The Trees had a splendid 4,000-acre estate named Ditchley outside Oxford. The house had been built for the Earl of Litchfield and was one of the showplaces of England. Ronnie Tree had been a member of Parliament. I might say about that, when I was staying at Italy, I came across a framed poster that said that Ronald Tree had won this by-election, and they gave his occupation as gentleman. I've often wondered what would happen if a member of Congress gave his occupation as gentleman. As I said, Ronnie Tree had been a member of Parliament during the war, and Winston Churchill had stayed at Ditchley on weekends for fear the Germans had tried to bomb Chartwell, the Churchill's home. Ditchley was well supplied with servants, including the butler Collins and a number of footmen. One of these carefully laid out my dinner clothes each evening and put toothpaste on my toothbrush. The Trees were having a farewell dance because they were selling Ditchley. This was because Ronnie was having to pay taxes both in U.S. and England because he had substantial holdings as a member of the Marshall Field family. The house was decorated with masses of flowers and looked beautiful. The dance was a gala affair with a band, champagne, and fireworks. The Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh were there, and I foolishly tried to cut in on Princess Elizabeth. I was completely ignored. I decided that one did not cut in on a future queen without a previous introduction. Living in Auburn, when May and I moved back to Auburn, I was very much taken by a house at 34 Grover Street. It was large, attractive, and had a barn and an ample backyard. We bought it for $21,000. I went to work for the Citizen Advertiser, which was owned by my family. First, I worked in the press room, then I sold advertising. Then I was a reporter for 3 years and city editor for 7 years. When my father and I took control of the paper, we found that my Uncle Charles had done little to increase the circulation. We were able to increase the daily circulation from 13,000 to 20,000. I might say it's considerably less than that now. One day our paper carried a story reporting a company named Meredith Abco had applied to build a cable television system in Auburn. I had no idea what cable television was, but I soon learned. Should we go into the cable television business? I remembered a Harvard Business School professor saying that the railroads thought that they were in the railroad business, and they were actually in the transportation business. Consequently, they missed out on the bus, trucking, and airline businesses. I thought we were in the communication business, and we should be in cable too. So we started a cable television in Auburn. As time went on, we received very generous purchase offers to sell the cable. I finally decided to sell out, and we did. The Osborne Memorial Association. After my Uncle Charles died in 1961, I took his place on the Osborne Association board. The association had been founded by my grandfather as part of an effort to try and reform the American prison system. The association was not run as well as it could have been. When I joined the board, we had 3 employees, there was 1 program, and we were struggling. We hired Liz Gaines to run the association, and the Osborne grew substantially and has continued to grow. It now has a budget of $42 million and 350 employees. I served on the board for 50 years and watched it become a force in the field of prison reform. I'm very pleased that my children, Lucretia, Betsy, Lithgow, and my grandson, Swift, are now or have been active in the association. The Osborne Memorial Association. The Osborne Memorial Association was started and funded by my great-grandmother and my grandfather, started in 1907. It was started to promote the moral and mental well-being of the working men and women of Cayuga County and the literary work of the Women's Educational and Industrial Union. The Memorial Association had a small portfolio which had been run by my Uncle Charles. He gave most of the money, most of the income to Women's Union. When the Women's Union joined the YMCA, it seemed to me that the union was no longer serving its original funded purpose. I raised the issue, and the money was returned from the union to the Memorial Association. I ran the association for a while, and then in 2014 I decided professional management would do a better job and turned the fund over to the Central New York Community Trust. The current portfolio is $700,000. Athletics has always been an important part of my life. From school days on, I played football, hockey, and lacrosse at Deerfield. When I went to Harvard, I rode in an 8-oar shell as an undergraduate, and then in a single shell as a graduate. When I went back to Auburn, I played squash in the winter and tennis in the summer. One day I was at the Harvard Club in New York and I needed exercise. I went to the club gym and found a machine, the like of which I had never seen. I sat down and tried it and recorded how much I enjoyed rowing. After finishing my row, I went downstairs and called up Concept Tube, the maker, and ordered one of their machines. I used that machine more and more. In 1997, I set a new world's record for men 70 years and older. And in 2007, I set another record for men 80 years and over. I hasten to say that both records have since been broken. I continue to enjoy rowing on the machine and listening to audiobooks when I do so. I'm sure that rowing has helped to keep me in good health. My goal now is to set a new world record, 100 and over.
Well, as you can see, I was an unnecessary bench warmer. So I'm now going to introduce you very briefly to my brother Lithgow, we were each of my siblings and I were each asked to contribute a story to my father's memoirs. Lithgow is going to come out and read his. He is in the midst of finishing up a novel, and 6 of us have the privilege to call him a brother. Here he is.
Well, it was very nice to hear you read aloud. You don't know this, but every night before my younger brother Minturn and my younger sister Lucretia and I would go to bed, we would gather in my bedroom and my father would read to us. And mostly, won't surprise you, mostly Victorian adventure stories for young children, because that's what my grandfather was read as a child. That's what my father was read the same books. So of course they were good enough for my grandfather. My father were good enough for us too. But I have to say that it was there wasn't a night that we didn't end up, all 4 of us, weeping some kind of tears over the drama. So it's always nice to hear my father read aloud. And I just want to say how grateful I am to Angela and to Joanne and to all of you for coming out and supporting not only the Auburn Public Theater, but come and support my father in his endeavors. He's been such an advocate for Auburn and for many of the causes, and promoting so many wonderful institutions here in Auburn, that it's nice that you all are now here to support him and show him how much you admire him, and that your interest in his book is deeply appreciated. So thank you. Surprisingly, he asked each of us to submit a memory for his book, and this is what I wrote. I guess one of the most vivid memories I have of growing up is a visit to Willow Point during the winter. Willow Point is our summer house on Owasco Lake. I might have been 9 or 10 years old. It was decided that we would walk across the lake to Dolphin Point and back again. I know that we made the trip alone, but I have no idea if we were alone at Willow Point. It seems unlikely, but I cannot remember whether or not there were others. I remember this because he and I were hardly ever alone together. There were always others, many, many others. We stood at the shore looking east across the vast frozen lake. I was thrilled at the prospect of walking on the ice and standing in the middle of the lake. It was very cold and silent, with only a bit of wind. The surface was a bit rough from snow, but there were patches of ice, so I walked carefully. As we made our way, I began to ask the inevitable questions about how thick the ice was and how cold it had to be to be safe to walk on. He always seemed to know the answers. As we approached the middle of the lake, we began to hear the ice creaking and cracking. His calm gave me confidence, and we kept walking. We were more than halfway across when there was a very long, loud cracking noise. We stopped, silently staring ahead. I looked around to see if there was any change in the surface of the frozen lake, any evidence to indicate that we might be in trouble. I had no voice to express my rising fear. The terror of crashing through the ice seemed very real. I could only think of the characters I saw in movies or read about in books, where they met their doom engulfed in freezing waters. As ever, he remained calm and voiced no concern. Wordlessly, slowly, he reached down and took my hand. In an instant, I was calm. Every terrifying image that passed through my head disappeared. We walked the rest of the way in silence. And I have to say, if you know him, you know that silence is a, is a trait. He's a man of few words. But when he has something to say, he says it, and he says it right to the point. And so I'm grateful. So now we're going to bring out Joanne. Is that right? Joanne? Here we are. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lithgow. So I guess I'm going to do this right. Let's take this microphone and going to warm myself up over here and get in one of these chairs, and I'm going to ask Mr. Osborne some questions myself. Hello. So I've, like so many of you here, and like Angela, could not put the book down, and I have a few questions. Something that's not in the book, I guess it's a rhetorical question. Wonder how many historical markers are there in the streets of Auburn celebrating the Osborne contribution?
Well, that's a rhetorical
I think-
question.
Right,
I have no
I think it
idea.
is. I have no idea, but I think I might go out and count them one day. In your book, you talk about your grandmother, Eliza, and her home on Fitch Avenue, and something new was coming into the neighborhood.
Yes. The New York Telephone Company, the house was located on the corner of South and Fitch, and the New York Telephone Company decided that they would run a telephone line down Fitch Avenue, so they sent their employees out to dig holes for the telephone poles. Well, my great-grandmother really didn't want telephone poles on the edge of her property, so she sent her gardeners out to fill in the holes. The New York Telephone Company got rather cross and went to court on this issue. If you should happen to drive down Fitch Avenue, you'll notice that the telephone poles are on the other side of the street.
I love that. You have a very special godmother, Jane Peyton Adams, who was the wife of celebrated writer Samuel Hopkins Adams, and you have a little story about her.
Yes, she was my godmother, and did not always cope well with her husband. And when she got annoyed with him, she'd say, "Sam, you great big goddamn fool." I was about 6. I was staying with my aunt and uncle, and the Adamses came to dinner. And I walked down the stairs, and I said, in my most cheerful voice, "Hello, you great big goddamn fool." And it's funny, Mr. Adams said, "Richard and Devon's Osborne are quite nice, but I don't know about Erik."
Well, Mr. Osborne, in your book, I was reading that when you were on summer break at the age of 17, after your junior year at Deerfield, before you entered your senior year at Deerfield, you had a very special summer job that might surprise a lot of us, what you did that summer.
Well, that summer, I found a job working on a farm just outside, owned by Fred Wyatt, just outside of Scipio Center. And I helped clean out the cow barn, which was always in need of cleaning, and washed the milking machines. And Fred had a team of horses, so I cut hay with the team and cultivated the corn and helped put the hay bales in the barn for the whole summer. I got paid $3 a day.
That was work. Just earlier, you told us about your experience with Queen Elizabeth and being rebuffed by her, but you were also rebuffed by another television personality with the Osborne Association, which actually made me laugh, fall on the floor. You might share that with us?
Well, Martha Stewart had gone to jail over on a stock fraud issue, and I happened to be at a party in New York where she arrived, and I went up to her. I thought, she's been to jail. She's a very articulate woman. Perhaps she can help the Osborne Association. So I went up to her and introduced myself and started out. And I've never seen anybody depart quite as fast as she did go away from me.
Love that. Well, those are my questions, and I'm sure a lot of you out here have questions of your own. So we are going to turn the microphone out to you. And Angela, are you there? She's right there. She is going to facilitate the microphone. So if someone wants to start the questions rolling, raise your hand.
What year was were the telephone poles installed or moved?
They weren't moved. They were installed. I think it must have been in the early 1900s.
Good afternoon. You refer to a nurse accompanying you throughout much of your young life. Was there a specific reason you had a nurse?
Called her a nurse, but she essentially was a nanny. I don't think my parents had other things to do besides coping with me. So she looked after me, and I can remember I was devoted to her, and when I was 7 or something like that, I was sent off to summer camp, and I came back and looked for her and discovered that she wasn't there, and I was absolutely devastated. I ran all over the house, and I guess my parents had decided that they really didn't need her anymore, and so let her go.
Well, you had rheumatic fever. That was why she took care of you for quite a while, right?
Well, when I was 15, I had rheumatic fever. It was my first year at Deerfield, and I was taken by ambulance to Albany, where my parents were living at the time, and was in the hospital for 3 weeks. And then I was in bed from then to September. This was in late February. And didn't feel terribly badly, but I was told if I got up, I could permanently damage my heart. So I stayed in bed. And I learned how to play chess. I played chess and backgammon and piquet and gin rummy with my mother and anybody else who came along. I read a book a day and listened to radio serials. And then in September, I was able to get up and had survived the rheumatic fever without any permanent damage to my heart.
We have a question over here.
There seems to be a number of Lithgows. There seems to be one in every generation. So what is the significance of that name, Lithgow?
Well, it's there was somebody with the final name of Lithgow that came over on the Mayflower, and I think it's been the name around well ever since. There is today a John Lithgow, who I assume is probably some kind of a distant relative. My parents came, the original Osborne came over in 1636 and lived in Massachusetts until he slept in meeting, and then he was sent, then I think he was sent to Rhode Island. But anyhow, that's the background of Lithgow.
Eric, what made you to decide to get into the cable vision business?
Well, the fact that we were in the radio, newspaper business, the radio business, and it was communication, and we were in the communication business. And we owned, at that point, we owned WMBO and The Citizen, which are really the only communication units in Auburn, and we figured we better have cable too. The New York Telephone Company built the first cable system for us and leased it to us. But we didn't build the first cable company. We had the first cable system. We leased it from the phone company, and at the end of 10 years, when our lease ran out, we overbuilt the phone company with their own system.
We have another question.
The Columbian Rope Company was started because they thought they were paying too much money for binder twine. So my grandfather and Colonel Metcalf started making their own binder twine, and Columbian Rope expanded from that. We owned a smaller share of Metcalf's owned most of Columbian Rope, and my grandfather owned a part of it. Because when I was growing up, I had shares in Columbian Rope, helped pay my way in college.
Another question? Yes?
Hi, and I want to tell you what an inspiration you are to all of us. Can you hear me through this?
Yes.
Yes.
Physically, everything. Thank you so much. But I remember more than 60 years ago, I was asked to be your babysitter for Lithgow, Lucretia, and Minturn. And I remember you and your wife, well, she had planned the beautiful supper for them. All I had to do was serve it and then play. But you and your wife were going off to play tennis. And so I was wanted to know how long tennis played a part in your lives, and how long you continued with tennis.
Well, I played tennis and golf growing up, and then my first wife was an enthusiastic tennis player, so I really stopped playing golf, and we played tennis. We played doubles, and I played until I got arthritis in my right hand and couldn't serve anymore. And that was, I think, in my late 70s or early 80s. And then I stopped playing tennis. I had to stop playing tennis, and I kept on rowing. I rowed in a single shell. There used to be senior races all over the East Coast, and I rowed in Boston and rowed in Philadelphia, rowed in Washington, and rowed elsewhere. Not terribly well, but with a lot of enthusiasm. And then I started rowing on the rowing machine, and I did better on that.
I have a question for you. What was it like babysitting the Osborne kids? Not bad. Do we have another question?
Here, Joanne.
Okay.
Hi, Eric. George Cuthbert here in the center of the room. Eric, and
Yes.
Thank you for doing this. It's absolutely wonderful. My question is back in 1964 when you encountered Bobby Kennedy at the Polish home camp when he was running for New York State Senate. Why do you think he hurried off?
Well, Jack and Bobby Kennedy and I belonged to the same club at Harvard. And the Harvard clubs were mostly occupied by private school students, people who had been in private schools. And so I went up to Bobby Kennedy and I said, Bobby, you and I must be the only Democrats who belong to the Speak Club, barring your brother. He took one look at me and went somewhere else.
Do we have another question? I see one up there.
Wear my sneakers.
I went to the Citizen, the building.
Could you speak up just a little bit? Thank you.
I went to the Citizen, the building, about 20 years ago to thank them. So they didn't know what I was talking about, thought I was an idiot. So I'm going to tell you, when I I was in the Marine Corps in Vietnam, 1968, 69. We used to get a free citizen sent to us, and it come all rolled up, and we get about 12 at a time because it would finally catch up to you. But then one day, here's the kicker. One day, I'm looking at the paper, and it's another guy's name on it. And come to find out, there was only 30 of us in this unit. And this guy was from Auburn. He was getting the citizen, and he grew up. We probably lived 200 meters from each other. Never knew it. He was going home in 2 weeks, so I got to connect with him a little bit in that 2-week time. And then I become friends with David Connolly, and David Connolly told me that would be the Osbornes. They would do that. So thank you for that.
I love that. Thank you so much. Do we have another question? Anyone? Yes.
Yeah, your ancestry, I guess, or your family, international harvester. Could you shed some light on that from your memories or history?
Well, after my grandfather died, great-grandfather died, my grandfather took over running E.M. Osborne and Company, and he was less than interested in business. And I think the competition with McCormick, Deering, and the other companies was pretty fearsome. And he just decided that it was time to get out. So he sold for cash to McCormick Deering, which became International Harvester. Whether I think he was offered stock, but opted for cash. Now, at the time, it seemed like not a good idea, but in retrospect, it probably was.
Do we have another question? Yes? George?
They didn't build it. My great-grandfather got it on a bad debt. Now, 150, 100 with baths.
Another question? Anyone? Question? Yes. Questions about the Seward family or Harriet Tubman?
Well, my great-grandmother was friendly with Harriet Tubman. Indeed, Dorothy Wickenden wrote a book called The Agitators, which tells of Frances Seward, my great-grandmother, Martha Coffin Wright, and Harriet Tubman. And my uncles used to tell about Harriet Tubman coming to the door looking for funds to support the house she ran out South Street. But they were, the family was abolitionists, along with being suffragettes. Lucretia Mott was my great-great aunt, and he and my great-great-grandmother helped to write the Declaration of Sentiments in 1848, which was really the start of the suffragette movement.
Another
Eric?
question?
Yes. Eric, could you share with us the secret to your longevity, your health, and your brilliance? You play a great game of bridge, backgammon, you row every day, you wrote 5 books. Is there anything else?
Oh, I play poker, not very well.
Poker.
And I keep track of how I'm doing with the same group. And generally, I lose about $150 a year. However, backgammon, I used to play backgammon at the Harvard Club in New York, and I did quite well there.
Another question? Anyone? Yes, George? Of course, George.
He was quite good friends with Alan Dulles because Alan and Foster Dulles, I guess, grew up here. And Alan was my father's contemporary. And when the war came, my father wanted to do something other than, he was New York Conservation Commissioner. And so he got a job with the OSS. And then Herbert Lehman hired, was running United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation, and hired my father. He sent him out to Australia. And then at that point, my father got a telegram saying that Franklin Roosevelt had appointed him ambassador to the government in exile, Norwegian government in exile. My father used to tell the story. He wanted to go back, catch a plane from Australia to go back to sign up, as it were. And the only planes that were flying were military planes. So he went and asked somebody in the Army, and the man said, well, if we have a spare seat, we'll give you we'll let you on. And then he went and complained to whom I don't know, but he discovered he outranked a 4-star general. So he got a quick trip back to the States.
I guess so. Another question? Yes? How do we get to Auburn today, since the boom days?
Well, I think this is my view, and it's not a very terribly cheerful one. I think the Auburn I grew up in, most, not all, but most of the factories were locally owned and rum. And during the course of time, they've all gone out of business or been sold and transferred so that the demographics of Auburn have changed. I mean, now I don't think there are any manufacturing concerns that are locally owned. And indeed, there are not many commercial concerns that are locally owned. I mean, the paper isn't owned locally, the radio station isn't owned locally, the big store and Hislops and Waits, all these local enterprises have gone, and all the factories have gone, so that everybody's working for somebody from out of town, which is not a very cheerful situation. Does that answer your question?
Another question? Yes? The babysitter?
Well, I don't. Ted Case, his youngest son, and was a great friend of mine. So I did know him. And I don't think he ever wanted to leave Auburn. I mean, when he and Fox invented the talking movies, I think the question was moving to California. I don't think Ted Case didn't want to. I might say one other thing about, we talk about the soundtrack. Ted Case named the thing that went on the side of the film. He thought it looked like the railroad track that ran through his property. So he called it the soundtrack.
Wow, I love that. Never knew that.
Oh, yes. I mean, their summer place was right next to ours. And my older brothers knew the older cases, and the younger one was Johnny, the youngest of the four cases. He was 10 days older than I was, which you never let me forget.
So, folks, we're going to wind up here in this room, and we're going to go into stage right. And if you think of another question for Mr. Osborne, you can ask him there. We also will have books for sale there, and Mr. Osborne will sign your book. But I, for one, would like to thank Mr. Osborne again and again for this very, very special afternoon. Thank you all, and Merry, Merry Christmas.